All right, here we go, everyone. Another awesome episode of the All Around Adventure podcast. And I'm very excited to welcome Jack Carr to the show today, who is a former Navy SEAL and a New York Times bestselling author of the Terminal List series. So, Jack, thanks so much for taking time for joining me today, and welcome to the All Around Adventure podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it is an honor to have you here. And this is a milestone episode for the All Around Adventure podcast. Now, unfortunately, you are not the first number one New York Times bestselling author that I've welcomed on the show, but you are, in fact, the first Navy SEAL to come on the podcast. So we got something there for you.
All right. Who else did you have? Who else was the number one New York Times bestselling author you had on?
A couple months ago, I had Kyle Mills on the podcast. Yes, and Mitch Rapp is one of my most beloved fictional characters, and I've just remembered, and I was worried about what was going to happen with that series following Vince Flynn's passing, rest his soul. But I was glad that Kyle took up the mantle and continued on with that series.
He's done a great job with it. Just incredible.
Yeah, definitely. So what I kind of want to ask you first, getting into this, is just, kind of your mindset right now, because you made your debut as an author about 5 years ago, and since then you've wrote 5 books in the James Reese series, all bestsellers. And of course, you have the Terminal List Amazon Prime series, with a cast that you were hoping for, a director that you were hoping for. Now, just making your debut back then, did you ever imagine that things would unfold as fast as they did and to the extent that they did?
It sounds horrible to say, but yes. And I think that's because this is what I wanted to do other than be a SEAL since I was a little kid. So it's the same thing as like, maybe you wanted to be an archaeologist at age 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or the first time you saw Indiana Jones or something like that. And that's what you stayed focused on. And everyone around you thought, oh, he'll grow out of it. He just saw this movie, and now he saw the second one. He saw the third one. He's always digging up stuff in the backyard, but he'll grow out of it eventually, and he'll get a regular job, be a CPA or an attorney or something like that. So I always thought same thing. I was a little kid. I found out what SEALs were at age 7, and about age 10, I started reading the things my parents were reading. That's when I switched over from the young adult literature into like the adult literature, the same stuff that I read today. For sure, by 6th grade, though, by age 11, I was reading the David Morrells, Nelson DeMille's, A.J. Quinnell's, J.C. Pollock's, Mark Olsen's, Stephen Hunter's, Louis L'Amour's, like all those guys in the 80s who had protagonists with backgrounds that I wanted in real life one day. And so when I'm picking up that book, I'm looking at it and it says New York Times bestselling author, or number one New York Times bestseller, or whatever it's saying on there. Tom Clancy's, of course. Hunt for Red October came out when I was in 5th grade. And so I'd see that, and I just imagined that one day I'd be an author too, because I was enjoying just being in those pages, the magic of being in those pages. And I knew that after my time in the military, I'd write. And I never thought, oh, one day I'll be a failed writer, or one day I'll write something that no one will read, or one day I'll write something that won't make the New York Times list, or one day maybe I'll write something that won't get turned into a movie. I never thought any of those things. I've never even said those things until right now. I always thought the exact opposite of that. And what I was actually doing, and I didn't realize this till just a couple of years ago, was that I was giving myself an early education in the art of storytelling from the masters. So I was reading all the books that if you wanted to write eventually one day, that I should have been reading back then. I was actually reading them. I didn't get to age 40, 45 and think, I'm going to give this writing thing a try. I kind of like those kind of books. Who should I have been reading for the past 30 plus years? No, I'd already been reading all those guys, and through the lens of youth, meaning I didn't have the cynicism that tends to build up as you get older and have more experience, read more books, whatever it might be. I was just reading those things in the way that I think they were meant to be interpreted, which is just as they were. And I was loving that magic. And that's what I wanted to do when I got out of the military, was to write those kind of books. But I was thinking about it back in 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And I never really thought about doing anything else. And I certainly didn't think about failing at it. And so it sounds kind of horrible to say it like that, but it's not like a surprise, but I'm just working. I don't think about it in those terms. I'm just constantly working from the second I wake up to the second I go to bed, and I go to bed very late and I get up very early. And I'm just go every single day, to make sure that product, in this case, books, are the best that they can possibly be, and then do the things that you need to do today to connect with an audience. So having that podcast, putting up blogs, doing social media posts, and doing things in a thoughtful way that adds value to people's lives, rather than just put something up or whatever it is, or here's some pictures of my kids swinging in the tree, or what. No, it's things that are going to add value to people's lives that I put a lot of thought into. So any sentence that I write for an Instagram post, the same amount of thought goes into that as goes into a sentence in the book, because people are trusting me with their time in both cases, and that's time they're never going to get back. So that's something I take extremely seriously. So I guess that's a long way of saying that I never really wasted bandwidth thinking about failure. I always just wanted to make the best product I possibly could and do the best job I possibly could. I continue to do that today. Want to get better with the next book, better with the next sentence, and that's just, I guess, it's just how I'm wired and how I go through the day.
Well, of course, you've been a lifelong student up to this point, not only just in the realms of like all the works of fiction that you've read along the way, but of course, you're a student of warfare and you're a student of history, and you incorporate a lot of history in your work as well. So, in just conducting research for your books, where has this taken you? I know you've had the chance to go abroad a few times to actually conduct research for some of your novels.
Yep. So the first one, I was still in the military, so I leaned on places I had already been. In some of those cases, it was before the military. Some of it was my time in the military. A lot of it my military time was thinking about the feelings and emotions associated with certain events and then applying those to this fictional narrative. So that means I didn't have to go out and track down a sniper from Ramadi, Iraq at the height of the war and then ask him, hey, what did it feel like to press the trigger and do that job? And then have that answer filter through other interviews I'd been part of, other books that I've read, other movies that I'd seen, that sort of a thing, other documentaries I may have watched, and then filtered through that and then onto the page. No, it just comes all from my heart and soul right onto the page. So for that first one, I chose places that I'd been before. And then for the second one, I started writing that right after I got out of the military. And I hadn't sent the book off to Simon & Schuster yet, so there's no book deal. There's nothing like that. I had it about the best that I could get it, and that's what my goal was, to get it the best that I could possibly get it before sending it to an agent or a publisher. So it was kind of at that stage. And I always remember that story about John Grisham writing A Time to Kill, and that was his first book, and he couldn't give that thing away. And then he writes The Firm, and then The Firm takes off. And so in my head, I was always thinking, well, what if he just quit after he wrote A Time to Kill and no one bought it, he couldn't give it away? He might just be retiring from a law practice that he hates today. But he didn't. He wrote The Firm, that takes off. They republish a Time to Kill, and I think that's his best work. It's fantastic. If anybody hasn't read A Time to Kill out there. And then of course Matthew McConaughey stars in the movie, and then we have a John Grisham novel every year. But if he'd stopped after that first attempt, then we wouldn't have a John Grisham novel every year. So I always thought about that. So I always knew I was going to write 2 books for sure. And then if both of them didn't hit, then I was going to reevaluate my choices and figure out some contingency planning. But I jumped on a plane to Africa. So I went to Mozambique because that was going to be I'd been to Africa before, but I wanted to go someplace that I hadn't been before that was a little more off the beaten path. So went to Mozambique, put boots on the ground there. I had all these notes with translations that I wanted to get for different phrases or in the different dialects over there. And I wanted to go into, who's over here? What are the Chinese doing? What's poaching doing on this land? What are they doing with timber and mineral rights and how are they feeding all the people that are working, and just kind of figuring all that stuff out, and also taking a look. Look at these types of rocks. Take a look at, this is the color of this dirt right here, and feeling it and smelling it, and looking at the foliage this time of year. And hey, what happens here when it rains? And all those sorts of things. So I was taking just copious notes while I was over there. And so that was probably the first research trip that I took, even though I didn't have a book deal or anything else. And also for that book, I'd been to Ukraine before I joined the military. So back in the early 90s, I went to Ukraine. And so I used that at the end of the novel as well. So I tend to lean on places that I've already been, or I did anyway. And then I was planning on doing one big research trip per book, because it was so that Mozambique, being in Mozambique just really brought that part of the novel to life. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I hadn't put boots on the ground over there. So for the third one, Savage Son, which is one I wanted to write since the sixth grade, since I read The Most Dangerous Game. And even back then in sixth grade, when I was 11, I told myself that one day I'd write a novel that paid tribute to that story. And Savage Son was that book. It's actually the one I wanted to start with, but I knew that the characters weren't developed enough to explore the themes of that book, which it's really the dark side of man through the dynamic of hunter and hunted. So I knew that Terminalist had to come first because it was just hard hitting out of the gate, introduces these characters. And then at the end of that one, I realized that it would be disingenuous to the readers to just plop him into another adventure after the traumatic events of the Terminalist. So he needed to go on a journey, he needed to learn how to live again, needed to find that next mission in life. And he finds that in Mozambique. And I got to tap into a lot of the transition kind of things that I'd seen in the military. I'd seen a lot of guys have a hard time getting out and leave that life behind. So I got to think about that and weave that into the storyline, as well as my protagonist, James Reese, finds his next mission. But for that third one, I went over to Kamchatka Peninsula, Russia, and did research over there. And I went to do that research in, I think, mid-August of 2019. So went over there and did that. And that was also invaluable to that book. So for the next one, I planned on going somewhere, but then COVID hits and everything right. Shuts down. So I had to kind of lean on places. I made that one more domestic. There's a little bit of international stuff, but it's mostly domestic. And so I just leaned on places I've already been. And then for the next one, I planned to go to Israel, and COVID restrictions were lifting, and then they were not going away. And then you had to, and for Israel in particular, it was very difficult. It was like you had to be an Israeli citizen, and then there's all sorts of things that were shifting around with Israel, and it just you couldn't get over there if you weren't an Israeli citizen, and if you weren't willing to, or if you couldn't just change your travel plans or wait and then jump and then get back based on these changing conditions. And I couldn't do that with the schedule. So I went huge into research on Israel for this last one, for not the one that comes out here in May, but the one from last May, and that's called In the Blood. And I did so much research, and then I sent it to a family in Israel, and that has 3 generations there. So the oldest, I think, was 100, and then they had like 60, and then 30. And so they all read it, and they all couldn't believe that I hadn't been to Israel. And that's what I wanted. That's the kind of reaction that I wanted from 3 different generations. So I was like, okay, I got as close as I could without having been there. And I'll get there at some point. I'll weave Israel back in because it's a place that I've always wanted to go. So that's a very long way of saying, for each book, my goal was to go to at least one of the places that I'm exploring in the novel. And then that didn't happen because of COVID. So that's just how it goes. But I want to get back on that track here going forward.
Well, I certainly hope you do get a chance to see Israel. I loved visiting that country. I got to go there when I was in grad school. And of course, with me being an archaeologist, of course, like a biblical place like Israel is just going to really just, strike a chord with me for sure. So what I want to ask you next is just as you're writing some of these works, and I'm going to focus in on The Devil's Hand here a little bit, because The Devil's Hand is personally, I'd say, my favorite, but the book also terrified me because, you're looking at this from a lens of like, what are our enemies learning just by watching us? And then, of course, like with COVID and our response to it. And then, of course, like the summer of civil unrest that we had. And then just the way that you're portraying the characters and how they're viewing America throughout your work is just, I guess, has there ever been a point during your work where you actually maybe got like a little bit scared yourself, where it's like, this seems almost like too close to home and almost maybe too real, where maybe you're not really quite writing fiction anymore. Maybe you're actually foretelling the future, potentially, anything like that?
Well, in The Devil's Hand, I suspected a lot of the things that I wrote about in there, but I didn't have cause to really explore them or investigate until I started writing the novel. And a lot of the things that I thought were true ended up, yes, being true. And so that one's the first one that I didn't submit to the Department of Defense, because everything in it I learned outside the military. So the first 3 I submitted to the DoD just because it was closer to me being in the military and just wanted to be safe and all that stuff. But now, it's I'm so far out and doing all this research outside the military. It's yeah. So anyway, that one, I had a lot of people contact me that work in the realms of biodefense research and let me know that I got pretty dang close. if that wink wink type of a thing, So that was really cool. But for that one, my goal, and this was pre-COVID when I came up with the theme and with the one-page executive summary, which I do for every book, and the outline. And the theme was looking at the United States through the eyes of the enemy, who at that point had had almost 20 years of being able to observe the United States on the field of battle. And I thought, what if I was Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, a superempowered individual, a terrorist organization? What would I have taken from the United States actions in Iraq and Afghanistan over these last close to 20 years at the time? And that was the kind of the premise. And then as I'm writing that, COVID hits. And I'm like, well, this plays right into the theme of this novel, because the enemy is certainly watching our reaction to COVID and taking notes on how to exploit that. And they're adding that to their battle plans. It's so not that it was just natural. I was already in that groove. The book was already about that sort of a thing. But now, okay, I can use this COVID example. And then we have a summer of civil unrest. Once again, okay, the enemy is not just walking by and taking and passing notice of a headline. No, they're looking at what we're doing, how we're reacting to it, and figuring out how to exploit that for their own purpose and incorporating that into their future battle plans, whether it's a year out or 20 years out or 50 years out. But they're looking and they're learning and they're adapting, because that's what they do. And they typically do that a little better than we do, because we're thinking of things in 4-year, maybe 8-year election cycles for the real deep thinkers among us. And they're thinking more long-term. And then we get to a pretty wild election cycle. And so they're looking at that too, and they're learning from that, and figuring out how to cause more division if it serves their purpose. And so anyway, all those things got incorporated into the novel. And it's not that it scared me any more than I'm already disappointed in how easy it is to divide us as a nation with a tweet. So anyway, it's all that got incorporated into that novel. It ended up being very timely.
Yeah, I was listening to it when I was a couple years ago, towards like the end of 2021. I thru hiked across the entire state of Michigan, which is my home state, where I'm from originally. And I guess at that point, I was kind of glad that I was tucked away deep in the woods somewhere, in case any of this stuff were to happen to be going down. But yeah, that was one of the things that does make me feel kind of concerned. And it makes me think of a quote from Sebastian Junger in his book Tribe. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he said that with the political and civil divide within the United States, perhaps the ultimate strategy for terrorists would just be to sit back and do nothing. And
that's my takeaway.
Yeah, and so
my takeaway from that book was that if I was the enemy, I might not do much right now. Which, as an author, that's not the greatest thing, because you need a big event, a big set piece, a big finale, some resolution. And my takeaway was exactly that. Was that if I was the enemy, I might just watch. You just poke a little here, prod a little there, wait us out, see us continue to essentially destroy ourselves from the inside. And so that was my takeaway. So I guess that is, not that it was a huge surprise, but that was my takeaway from that novel, is that if I was the enemy, there's no need to, lob a nuke this way, because we're just destroying ourselves from the inside all on our own.
Yeah. Well, shifting gears to potentially a lighter note now, it's just with you traveling a lot now, especially because, you're doing book signings, and of course you may be doing some research trips, or, doing podcast appearances elsewhere. And then of course, doing your work as a writer, and of course, hosting the Danger Close podcast, which is a longer form podcast. You'll be talking with some of your guests for like a 2-hour runtime, if not longer, many times. And of course, now you're husband and a father as well. So I guess just having all those different roles and responsibilities, how do you go about managing them and making sure that you show up effectively in all those areas when you have so many of them that you're expected to show up in?
Yeah, I'm exhausted constantly. There are a few things that fell off my priority list, and those were getting sleep, eating right, and exercising. But I'm trying to get better. It's something that I need to get better at, because there are so many things going on, so many projects. I have my first nonfiction work that'll come out in fall of 2024, so it's about a year and a half away, on the Beirut barracks bombing in 1983. So there's not really the seminal work on that yet. So I always wanted to write a nonfiction series that looks into different terrorist events, particularly the ones that I grew up remembering. And one of those is the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing, and the shadow from that event looms large over U.S. foreign policy still today. So my first nonfiction comes out. I'm working with James Scott on that. Amazing guy. He's a historian, Pulitzer Prize finalist. Writes primarily his 5 books out primarily on World War II. Just amazing guy. So we've teamed up for that. So that's another project. I'm writing for the spin-off series for Amazon, creating it with the showrunner of The Terminal List. And showrunner, for those listening, is like a director for a major motion picture. For when you have multiple directors, the showrunner is kind of managing all that chaos for series television. So yeah, I'm writing an episode there, advising on all the other scripts, just like I did for The Terminal List. And then we roll right into True Believer after that, which is my second novel, with Chris Pratt starring in that one again. So it's go, go, go. There's a lot of projects, and I need to get better about managing my time. So I'm constantly learning there, and trying. This is my year, and I've said this, I think, every year for the past 3 years, to really get organized on that front, to be the most efficient with my time, so that when I am with my family, I'm present and I am there. And that is tough as an author, because you're always solving problems on the page, and that not just when you're in front of your computer, or at least for me, it's not. I'm thinking about it after I walk away and I'm downstairs, and it's, even if I'm not directly thinking about it, it's still there. It's still sitting back there, and I'm still, how's he going to get out of this? How are we going to figure that out there? How's that antagonist going to do this and create this response? And I'm always thinking. So I got to get better about that. That's something where I'm a work in progress.
Well, of course, there's a lot of ways that you could take the James Reese series. One thing I have noticed as I was reading, and I don't know if you're doing this intentionally, but it seems like you're not aging James Reese throughout the novels. So do you see this being kind of like what Ian Fleming did with James Bond? And, James Reese is going to be in his late 30s, early 40s, like by book 20, even still.
Yeah, I've decided to age him slowly, and I've thought about that a lot. But I think I'm going to age him slowly. And for those watching, listening, some authors have Spencer, I think Robert B. Parker. I think first he was a Korean War veteran, then he was a Vietnam veteran, now he's a Gulf War veteran. That sort of a thing. It just gets pushed, and it seems like a lot of the times the readership goes along with that. So that's kind of one way to do it. Or you can age him real time, like Stephen Hunter has with Bob Lee Swagger, kind of like Daniel Silva has done with Gabriel Allon for that series. But now you have these protagonists in their 70s out there, and so it's a little harder to do some of the physical stuff. But yeah, I've decided to age him slowly. I don't think I'm going to freeze him in time at like 42 or something, but I think I'll age him slowly, if that makes sense. And that could change. I'm not dead set on that. That's just where I am now with it, and kind of where I've been with it since I started.
All right. But next up, though, we have Only the Dead, which is going to be coming out in mid-May. So if I may ask, without revealing too much or any spoilers, can you give us a synopsis on it, and what do our readers have in store?
Yeah, so there were some unanswered questions at the end of the last novel, by design, and this next novel answers those questions. And each book has had a theme. I start with the title, because I don't want to have any bandwidth worried about the title as I'm typing away. I don't want to think like, oh, geez, I've had good titles so far, and I really need to think of a good one and have my mind thinking about that. So I put a title down, even if it's a working title. So that's not part of my bandwidth as I'm sitting there typing away. And then I have a theme that guides everything. So the first one was revenge, and I changed that as I started typing to revenge without constraint. So each one has had this theme. And this next one here is truth and consequences. So it's the James Reese's father's past, kind of coming to roost and the things that he did coming to roost in the present. So it's I think that's probably the best way to talk about it without giving too much away. But questions will be answered. It ended up being the most brutal. Like the last one was the most action packed. I think this one's on par with action, but I didn't start it that way. So In the Blood, I think you could say, if you were to read them all, from beginning to end, for the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, that you'd say the last book was the most action packed. But this one's pretty dang close, if it's not as action packed. Certainly the most brutal. but I didn't start off the last one saying, I got to write the most action-packed one now. Here I go. It just kind of naturally happens that way. And this is also the longest. And here's the galley. I keep pointing over here because the galley here, this is like still a rough draft. But yeah, so this one is the longest so far, and I didn't really, you don't know exactly. I didn't when I started that it was going to be this long. I thought it's going to be about 115,000 words, maybe 120, and I passed 110, passed 115, passed 120, passed 125, passed 130, passed 135. So I was just kept going. That's just how long it needed to be, because that's just what the story took. But in that 100 and almost 40,000 pages, it became the most brutal novel to date. So if anyone doesn't like that or is squeamish, they should probably go elsewhere.
Well, what I certainly appreciate about your work, Jack, is that your novels make me think. I mean, I have like a list of like historical events that I need to do more research about. I want to research more about the Sela Scouts. I want to learn a little bit more about Operation Wrath of God, and of course, just like the SEALs of old too. You know, you mentioned the Vietnam era SEALs in a lot of your work as well. But also, it's just I remember when I was going through In the Blood, when James Reese is in Lackland Air Force Base. And I remember I was listening to that. I was driving to go visit my cousin, who is a fellow hunter, and he was helping me get ready for a boar hunt that I had coming up. But I just remember showing up to his house. I'm just like, what did I just listen to? Because like the way they were explaining the different levels of the internet and artificial intelligence, I'm like, oh my goodness, is that really out there? So
yeah, I've had a few people contact me after that one and tell me that, you know what, you're pretty dang close again. So that's kind of cool to be able to have people like that reach out that work in that space and tell me you're probably too close. And that one that's kind of crazy that we have this chat with GPT thing now and all the AI stuff in the news right now. And for my last novel, In the Blood, that was a big part of it and came out last May. And now a lot of this stuff is being openly talked about. It's crazy. It's crazy. A lot of that's come to fruition.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to be respectful of your time because I know you have a lot going on leading up to the release of Only the Dead. But as we start winding down here, one thing I want to ask from you is, and I typically ask this for all my guests, and that is to issue a challenge to our listeners. You know, because we get to hear some stories from you, we get to talk about some other information and historical tidbits and so on and so forth. But as I always say, information and stories can only take us so far. We have to follow it up with action to go out and do amazing things in our lives. So with that, what challenge would you issue to our listeners today for them to go out there and start living a more adventurous life?
Maybe two. The first is to take a breath before making snap judgments based on a tweet or a headline that's meant to manipulate, and go back, study the history, take your time, and think about all the people that sacrificed everything so that we could have the options and opportunities we have today, before just jumping to some sort of a conclusion on an issue just because an influencer, quote unquote, reposted something. So take some time with that. And then the second I would say is, something I tell my kids actually is, and something I think of myself is never miss an opportunity to make somebody's day. And that's ended up how my book ended up getting published, and how the book ended up getting in Chris Pratt's hands was because of something like that I didn't even mean to do back in the SEAL days. So so I'd say never miss an opportunity to make somebody's day.
Absolutely. And those can be just simple, small things. Like for me, what I find is that whenever I check out at the grocery store, I always greet the cashier and I address him or her by their name. And it's just their face just lightens up, because I mean, how many times does anyone take the effort just to do something that simple, like call them by their first name, and them hearing their first name, told to them in such a polite way.
That's very cool. Very cool. Love it.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. All right. So what I have for you next is my final three. These are three fun questions that I ask all my guests at the end of the show. So of course you're going to get asked these as well. And we'll try to do these rapid fire, like the word association, just say what comes to mind. And the first one is, what is your favorite place that you've been to so far?
Well, I'm going to keep one a secret because I want it to stay that way. and haven't been there for a while, but I'm going to keep one a secret. So I'd say I really, when I think back of all the different places that I've been, the ones that stand out are the ones that are a surprise, the ones that are not what I was anticipating. And one that jumps out at me is Morocco. And I was in Morocco years and years ago. And I kind of didn't realize, I was like, Morocco, this is way pre-internet. This is early 90s. And I was like, okay. It was amazing. I mean, going to Marrakesh and going through the bazaar and getting like fresh orange juice off the street and then going to the coast. And I mean, going to Morocco. I'd like to go back to Morocco, and I might be going back here soon, actually. But I'd like to go back and spend a little more time there. So I think when I think of all the different places that I've been, and I've been very fortunate to go a lot of different places, Morocco stands out. But I think it was because it was more of a surprise to me, because I hadn't really looked into it. I was very young and I hadn't really studied up on it. So I didn't really have an expectation other than, going to Morocco. But wow, what a beautiful place.
Yeah, I loved visiting there too. I got to go to Marrakesh, got to go to the souks, did some trekking in the Atlas Mountains and rode camels in the Sahara. And Morocco's up there for me too. So we got that in common.
Nice. I got to get back. I got to get back with my family, I think.
All right. Outstanding. All right. So next question in the final three. What is one thing on your bucket list that you have yet to do?
Ooh, dang. You know what? The biggest ones I've done. And so I just, now I just add, but I'm not like, I don't have a list that's like, I got to do that, or I got to do that. Personally, it was to make it through BUD/S, become a SEAL, serve my country in combat. So did that. And the other one was to be a #1 New York Times bestselling author, and to have something that I wrote made into a TV show or a movie, and did that. So now it's really all about improvement, my work, and then me as a human being, as a husband, as a father. So that's, So other than that, bucket list, just, there's all these things that I want to do, and I will never get to all of them. So I don't tend to look at things in terms of a bucket list. A lot of people, talk about once in a lifetime, this or that. And I've never thought about things like that. I've been fortunate enough to go a lot of places that were once in a lifetime, multiple times. So I don't really think in those terms. It's more like just improving and getting out there with my family, getting on rivers, just being together, away from our devices, away from everything that beeps at us constantly these days. So more of that. If there was something on the bucket list, I guess it would be just more of those family trips together, where we're away from the devices and out there in the wild.
All right. Outstanding. And the last of these three questions, and this is a two-parter. What is your favorite animal, and have you seen this animal in the wild?
Yes. So always, the wolf was always fascinating to me for whatever reason, since I was a little kid. Maybe I don't know, Native American folklore that I had little touch points with here and there. Lone Wolf McQuade with Chuck Norris back in the day. I'm sure that was a part of it. So wolves have always been fascinating to me, and I've only seen them in the wild once. I'd say that'd be the first thing that comes to mind.
All right, great. Well, Jack, before I let you go here, I was hoping I could ask you for kind of a big favor before I let you go, if that's okay. I want to tell you really quick about my father. My father's name is Victor. And he's an avid fiction reader, has been pretty much all his life. And, he worked really hard bringing me up, as well as my siblings. And, reading fiction was kind of sort of his solace that he would go to. And, he's just got like a big library at home. And he always likes to get the hardcover editions of every book that he reads. And like, he introduced me to Vince Flynn when he first started off the Mitch Rapp series, and other greats too, like Thor and Child and everything. But I actually introduced him to your work, and now he's all caught up. He has all your books, and actually, when the Terminalist came out on Amazon Prime, no joke, Jack, he and I got together and we sat together and watched the whole season in its entirety in one go together. So your work is bringing fathers and sons together
awesome.
Out there. Yeah. So before I let you go, I was really hoping if I could ask you to give my father a quick shout out on the podcast. I think it would really make his day.
Victor, man, thank you. Victor, thank you so much. I appreciate all the support, and so glad you're loving the books. And also, loving the show. And you probably, I mean, something that does resonate is the father son theme that rolls through these books, and it is very strong in Only the Dead. And you'll see that they're definitely connected, and that father is helping his son through memories and through lessons that were passed on to James Reese that are helping him deal with his current adversity. So there's a father son. There's actually a couple guys. They made put a team together, and they made a short film called Fathers and Sons. It's called A Terminalist Story. You can find it on my blog if you scroll down far enough. But just type it in, and it'll pop up on YouTube. And it's really cool. It's during COVID, and they I think almost everybody, not just in the cast but in the crew, was a veteran, and they made this really cool short film around a pool table, and it's called Fathers and Sons, and it's pretty powerful. It's really cool. So Victor might want to check that out. But thank you guys so much. Sincerely appreciated.
It's our pleasure. And thank you very much, Jack, for joining me today. So we got Only the Dead to look forward to. And of course, you got 5 other books in the James Reese series that's out there. So how can we connect with you, and how can we find you and support you? So websites, social media accounts, what do you got for us?
Yeah, officialjackcarr.com. That is the website, and find out more about the books on there. There's a blog on there, reading lists on there. I get a lot of questions about reading recommendations, so I have a section of the website set up for that. There's merch on there, clicking the upper right-hand corner for that sort of thing. And then on the social channels, I'm at Jack Carr USA, and I engage on Instagram and Twitter. I think there's a Facebook, but I think it just kind of reposts things from Instagram because 2 was almost too much. But I try to get back to everybody, and I try to hit that little heart button and thank people because really this is all happening because of that grassroots word of mouth, both in person and modern day word of mouth on the social channels. So that's sincerely appreciated. And I try to thank everybody I can. So those are the 2 social channels that I engage on, and then officialjackcarr.com for everything else.
All right. Well, I'll get everything linked up in the show notes for this episode, or if we have viewers watching the video on YouTube, they can find it in the description below. So it's all going to be there for them, quick and convenient to just click and go find everything. So, all right. Well, Jack, this has been an honor, and I want to thank you very much again for taking the time for joining me today. I know you're busy leading up to the release of Only the Dead, and you're highly sought after right now. And you certainly have been highly sought after for the past 5 years since you made your debut. But I really appreciate you and just how you're showing up in the world. So yes, thank you so much for being here and sharing your stories and insight with myself and the listeners. It's been great.
No, so much fun. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time in uniform. That's sincerely appreciated as well.
Absolutely. Right on, sir.
All right. Take care.